What was the recent referendum in Chad that formulated a new constitution? Why has Chad become the center of attention after the country's Supreme Court has announced the results? It appears that the Western powers were not expecting what just happened. Since 2021, Chad has been ruled by the military junta that promised to draft a constitution before the start of 2024. However, as the majority of Chad's public voted yes to the new constitution, uncertainty prevails. Will we see a new civilian government in Chad's 2024 elections? Or will the present military junta take hold? How does this new constitution change everything? Let's know about that in this video. The first question is, who has been ruling Chad until now? Chad's fate took a different turn in 1982. Hissène Habré, a ruthless military leader, seized power through a brutal coup, thrusting the nation into a dark chapter. His reign, characterized by a grim combination of ethnic tensions, political oppression, and systematic human rights abuses, etched a lasting scar on the collective memory of the Chadian people. Despite fleeting economic growth from oil discoveries, the toll was evident in the suffering of thousands. Dissatisfaction fumed, sparking the flames of rebellion in 1990. That's when Idriss Déby Itno, once an ally-turned adversary of Habré, thought of staging a coup. Leading a makeshift army fueled by public anger and promises of a new era, he captured N'Djamena and toppled the dictator. However, Déby's commitment to democracy proved short-lived. A skilled political operator, he wielded power with an iron grip, suppressing dissent, consolidating control over the military, and weaving a web of patronage that trapped the nation. Stability returned, but at the cost of restricted freedoms and rampant corruption. Déby's rule, marked by a dual nature, navigated treacherous waters, internal rebellions, regional conflicts, and the strategic considerations of the West in the War on Terror. He secured legitimacy while simultaneously tightening his grip on Chad. However, in 2021, he was killed in a battle against rebels. Uncertainty, thick and suffocating, descended upon the land of Chad. That's when Mahamat Déby Itno, the late president's son, assumed the reins of power, raising concerns about dynastic succession. It seemed that Mahamat had inherited the country that was taken into control after a coup. In other words, Mahamat's rise to power was an extension of the 1990s coup. Since 2021, Mahamat has been in power, ruling over the country. Earlier, he had made promises about the country's future, something that his critics did not believe. But what promise did Chad's military junta make? Chad's military junta, led by Mahamat Déby Itno, pledged to institute a new constitution and transition to civilian governance, following the passing of Idriss Déby, the country's long-standing president, in 2021. However, despite the initial commitment to hand over power to civilians after 18 months, the junta later extended this period to 2 years, prompting skepticism from critics about their dedication to genuine democratic elections. This skepticism is fueled by Mahamat Déby's appointment to lead the transition and the continued military influence in the political process. Underlying concerns revolved around the perceived establishment of a political dynasty through Mahamat Déby's rise, raising doubts about the sustainability of any future civilian government and the potential for ongoing military influence. The junta's crackdown on dissent and restrictions on political freedoms impeded opposition groups from organizing and challenging the transition plans. This further ensured Mahamat was in no mood to allow any civilian government to take over the country. However, his recent move has quite surprised not only the opposition but also the entire country and the African region. He unleashed a constitution, but before it could be accepted as final, he decided to have a referendum on it. So, how did the constitutional change begin? Chad started its campaign for a vote on a new constitution, viewed as a critical test of legitimacy for the ruling junta and the 30-year reign of the Itno dynasty. Transitional President General Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno, whose junta has been in power since 2021, initially promised to transfer power to civilians and hold elections this year, but later postponed them to 2024. More than 8.3 million people in the vast yet economically challenged Sahel country were called upon to participate in a referendum scheduled for December 17, representing a crucial step toward elections and establishing civilian rule. Opposition groups, NGOs, and political analysts argued that the ballot seems focused on sustaining Itno and his family's dynasty after 3 decades of absolute power enjoyed by his father, Idris Deby Itno. However, Muhammad decided to let the public decide about that matter. It should be noted that he could simply draft a new constitution and implement it. However, he chose to go to the public to fully legitimize the constitution, which would become the foundation of Chad's future. Various experts say that the proposed new constitution doesn't significantly differ from the previous one, concentrating substantial powers in the hands of the head of state. The pro-junta yes camp advocates for a unitary state, while opponents support a federal model. The most radical opposition groups, some leaders of which have gone into exile since the violent suppression of a demonstration on October 20, 2022, are urging a boycott, terming it a masquerade. According to the Consultation Group of Political Actors, GCAP, a platform of around 20 parties, what is proposed is a solitary electoral process for the perpetuation of a dynastic system. On April 20, 2021, a junta of 15 generals declared 37-year-old General Mohamed Deby as president for a transition period following his father's death on the front line while accompanying troops against rebels. Upon assuming office, Deby Jr. pledged to restore power to civilians and facilitate free elections after an 18-month transition period. He also committed not to run for office himself. However, 18 months later, based on the recommendations of a national dialogue boycotted by the majority of the opposition and powerful rebel groups, Mohamed Deby extended the transitional period by 2 years. At the same time, he allowed himself to stand for the presidency, making the transition from his army uniform to civilian attire. In October of the previous year, mass protests erupted following the extension of the transition period and were violently suppressed by security forces. Opposition and NGOs claim that between 100 and 300 people were shot dead by the police during protests in the capital, N'Djamena. The authorities, however, report around 50 deaths, including 6 members of the security forces. Recently, the government granted amnesty to all civilians and soldiers involved in the disorder, expressing the junta's desire for national reconciliation. The opposition objected to the notion of a general amnesty law, characterizing it as an attempt to shield from justice the police and soldiers responsible for the massacre. Over the past year, all anti-regime protests have been promptly declared illegal, except for one involving key opposition figure Success Masra, who returned from exile after signing a reconciliation agreement with Deby. On October 13th, Human Rights Watch, HRW, expressed concern about attempts to limit political dissidents before the referendum. HRW emphasized that for the referendum to be considered legitimate, opposition parties and leaders must feel free to convene and campaign. Otherwise, the referendum could be perceived as a strategy to transform the transitional government into a permanent one. Chad's population of 18 million is divided between the arid north, with a predominantly Muslim population that has held power for over 40 years, and a more fertile south, primarily inhabited by Christians and animists. In last year's UN Human Development Index, Chad was ranked as the second lowest country globally, and Transparency International placed it 167th out of 180 nations concerning the perception of corruption. But how did the referendum go, and how did the public respond? Chad conducted a referendum on a new constitution last Sunday, which appeared unlikely to heal profound divisions between the junta and opposing groups, exacerbating a political and security crisis in one of the world's poorest countries. The military authorities deemed the vote a crucial stepping stone to next year's elections, a long-promised return to democratic rule after they seized power in 2021 following the death of President Idris Deby on the battlefield during a conflict with insurgents. The proposed constitution aimed to establish autonomous communities with local assemblies and councils of traditional chiefdoms, among other changes. However, some political opposition and rebel groups called for a no vote or announced their intention to boycott the poll. They raised concerns about the independence of the Election Commission and rejected the new constitution for not addressing their wishes, including federalization. Decades of instability and economic mismanagement had hindered development in the oil-producing Central African country. where nearly 40% of its 16 million people relied on humanitarian aid. Bryce Nguyenbaye Mbaimon, coordinating a coalition voting no, argued that Chad had experienced a unitary state for over 50 years without tangible progress. It is time to let the population organize into federated states and steer their development, he told Reuters. Haroun Kabadi, coordinator of groups voting yes, contended that the new constitution did offer more independence, allowing Chadians to choose their local representatives and collect local taxes for the first time. He said that the people talking about a federation simply want to divide Chadians into microstates and fuel hatred between communities. Arguments from both sides are valid. Meanwhile, others called for a boycott, including former Prime Minister Albert Pahimi Padake, who told Reuters that the junta had too much control over the referendum process. The Africa-focused Institute for Security Studies had warned that tensions around the vote could lead to a repeat of the unrest that saw scores killed by security forces amid pro-democracy protests in October 2022. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. A central concern was that the referendum could help solidify the power of junta leader Déby's son, Mohamed Idriss Déby, who had already extended a proposed 18-month transition to democracy. The pattern of delay and obfuscation echoes the long-honed tactics of Idriss Déby, who came to power by force in 1990 and then held on to it for 3 decades. Analysts at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies said around 8 million Chadians were registered to vote in the referendum. The yes camp seems positioned for victory following a well-funded campaign by the ruling junta against a fragmented opposition, which has endured arrests, intimidation, and threats for over a year. The capital, N'Djamena, is filled with posters endorsing a yes vote to establish a constitution for a unitary and decentralized state. This constitution closely resembles the one revoked by the military in 2021, consolidating power in the head of state. In contrast, the opposition, advocating federalism, supports the no vote. The yes camp argues that a unitary state is the only way to preserve unity, while federalism would encourage separatism and chaos. Some advocates of a boycott were dismissive of both sides, claiming they're all the same, whether they're campaigning for yes or no. They've shared the money out between themselves, as expressed by Badono Daigu for the GSAP opposition platform at a rally. The result is a foregone conclusion. The yes vote will win. Midday voter turnout in the capital seemed limited, according to AFP journalists. Liman Mohammed, the head of the body organizing the referendum, suggested that more people might head to polling stations later in the day, citing Sunday as a day of worship. However, some electors remained defiant, with civil servant Muhammad Issa asserting, "Voting or not voting makes no difference. The result is known in advance." In southern parts of the city, often considered opposition strongholds, AFP journalists observed a relative enthusiasm for the vote. Gilbert Alain, expressing his federalist stance, declared, "I'm going to vote no to respect the instructions of my party." In the north of N'Djamena, Zenana Muhammad, one of the few people voting at midday, stated, "I voted yes for peace." The two primary coalitions of parties and civil society organizations opposed to the junta are banking on a low turnout to discredit a leader they accuse of perpetuating a 33-year Déby dynasty. Max Loangar, coordinator of one of the groups Wakit Tama, expressed that the referendum is purely and simply legitimizing the dynasty that they want to impose on us, in a telephone conversation with AFP from exile. But what was the referendum's result, and how did the country's Supreme Court respond to it? Chad's Supreme Court has definitively endorsed the referendum results for a new constitution organized by the military junta that has maintained control for the past 2.5 years. According to the final results, the yes side secured a victory with 85.90% of the vote, while the no side obtained 14.10%, with a turnout of 62.8%, as declared by the President of the Supreme Court during a press conference. Despite an appeal by the Bloc Fédéral, an opposition coalition that sought to nullify the results, citing irregular voting processes, the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal. The opposition, which had strongly advocated for a boycott, criticized what Max Kemkoy, president of the Groupe de Concertation des Acteurs Politiques, GCAP, labeled as a second coup d'etat by Mahamat Idris Deby Itno. He cast doubt on the credibility of the results. The new constitutional text does not significantly differ from the one already in force and continues to confer significant power to the head of state. So, how will this new constitution change things for Chad? Chadians have endorsed a new constitution, a move criticized by some who argue it could solidify the power of junta leader Mahamat Idris Deby. The referendum conducted earlier this month received approval from 86% of voters, according to the government commission that organized it on Sunday. The voter turnout was reported to be approximately 64%. Chad's military authorities consider this vote as a crucial step towards elections in the coming year, a promised return to democratic rule since seizing power in 2021 when the former president, Idris Deby, was killed in a battlefield conflict with insurgents. The new constitution maintains a unitary state, consistent with Chad's status since independence. On Friday, Chad's interim president, Mahamat Idris Deby Itno, officially endorsed the country's new constitution, marking a significant stride in transitioning to civilian rule. In a statement, the presidency underscored that the head of state's promulgation of the new constitution sets the stage for legislative elections, symbolizing the return to constitutional order. The president signed the decree approving the constitution in a solemn ceremony in N'Djamena, attended by Prime Minister Saleh Kebzabo, government members, and close associates of the head of state. The presidency highlighted this moment as a crucial milestone in the nation's history, born out of a democratic and inclusive process that reflects the aspirations of the Chadian people for enlightened governance. While some perceive the new Magna Carta as not significantly different from the one in place. Since 1960, it establishes a unitary but decentralized state, still concentrating most power in the hands of the head of state. Noteworthy changes include the election of governors through ballots rather than hand-picked appointments, according to Chadian researcher Ramaji Hoinathi. The Chadian leader and a coalition of approximately 120 political parties, including opposition leader Success Masra, who returned to Chad in November, support the new text. On the contrary, around 40 political groups oppose the project, advocating for Chad to adopt a federal structure. With the official endorsement of the referendum results by the nation's highest court, Chadians eagerly anticipate the 2024 elections and the establishment of civilian rule. Chad's new constitution has now taken effect after receiving approval from the Supreme Court, signifying a significant stride towards civilian rule. Fidel Amakye Owusu, an international relations expert affiliated with the Conflict Research Consortium for Africa, observed that Chad's shift towards civilian rule sets it apart from politically unstable neighbors in the Sahel region, such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, currently under military rule. He suggested that Chadian leaders aspire to showcase the country as unique within the Sahel context. Notably, the new Chadian constitution upholds a centrally governed state, despite some opposing voices advocating for a federal state to hasten development. Interestingly, the referendum did not present voters with the option to decide on this matter, and Chad has maintained a centralized government since gaining independence from France in 1960. Chadian analyst and University of N'Djamena professor Gilbert Maon Donoji voiced legitimate concerns regarding the limitations of the centrally governed state. He underscored that, after 6 decades of a unitary state, the weaknesses are apparent, as the unitary system has failed to promote national unity, establish conditions for sustainable development, and guarantee the prosperity of the country. Despite advocates for the new constitution introducing local-level governments and representatives, with the aim of allowing citizens to vote for their representatives in the upcoming elections, Fidel Amakye Owusu, an international relations expert, questioned its effectiveness. He argued that the centralized system grants excessive power to the central authority, impeding substantial change and decentralization. Ramaji Hoinathi, a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Chad, recognized some benefits of the centrally governed system. He observed that in a highly decentralized unitary state, certain skills are delegated to entities outside the central power, albeit remaining reliant on it. These entities, although autonomous, receive a degree of power to operate at the local level. So when will the elections be held in Chad? Well, drafting and adopting a constitution was Chad's biggest step. As of now, no formal date has been set for the elections, but it appears they will be carried out in 2024. Since giving a new constitution was part of the major plan to elect a civilian government, it becomes certain that elections will likely be arranged in the first months of 2024. Now, Chad has become the only country in the region to give a constitution during a military junta rule. Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré also announced making constitutional amendments that will be followed by elections and a shift of power to a civilian government. Perhaps Chad can now become an example of how things should be done in an African country under military junta rule. What do you think? Will the new constitution allow the present military junta to rule the country democratically? Isn't it true that if the people in Chad vote for the junta's leader, Mahamat Idris Deby, it will encourage other African countries like Niger, Burkina Faso, Gabon, and Mali to do the same? In the comment section right below, let us know your thoughts on who might win Chad's 2024 elections. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.